6 friends, Megan, Tyler, Sarah, Jason, Emily, and Ryan, were always chasing thrill. That night, they decided to venture into the dense forests of Northern California, drawn by rumors of a long-abandoned cabin hidden deep among the towering pines. According to local legend, no one who entered ever returned the same. Some never returned at all. The forest loomed like a living wall around them, shadows thick as ink, swallowing their headlights' beams as they drove deeper into the wilderness dot. By the time they parked and stepped out, a cold wind sliced through their jackets, carrying with it a silence so complete it pressed against their ears. Not a bird chirped, not a branch cracked under the weight of the night animals. The air was thick, damp, and carried an unsettling metallic scent. They joked to mask their unease, trying to keep spirits high as they trudged over roots and moss toward the supposed location of the cabin. Every step seemed louder than the last, echoing like distant drum beats. Their phones lost signal before they were halfway there, leaving them with nothing but flashlights that barely penetrated the forest's dense darkness. Then they heard it, a faint whisper carried on the wind. It was so soft they couldn't make out words, but it sounded like it was calling and named someone's name from their group. Megan stopped, her flashlight trembling in her hand, and the others froze too, straining their ears. Silence again. But in that silence, it was as if the forest itself were holding its breath. When they finally stumbled upon the cabin, it was far worse than anything they had imagined. It leaned like a broken tooth among the trees, blackened with age and rot, its wooden walls splintered and covered with moss and dark stains. The front door hung off its hinges, creaking slightly as the wind moved it, revealing a darkness so complete it felt like staring into an abyss. Every instinct screamed at them to leave, but curiosity, or maybe foolish courage, pushed them inside. The interior was worse than the exterior suggested. The floorboards groaned under their weight, every step releasing a sharp, splintering sound that made their skin crawl. Bloodstains faded to dark brown. Some still glistening unnaturally marred the wooden planks, leading to corners that seemed unnaturally cold. A broken chair lay across the hallway, legs snapped at grotesque angles. In the far corner, shadows danced against walls that were covered with scratches deep, violent marks, as if someone had clawed at them in desperation. Some walls had crude, almost illegible words scrawled in dark red. "This is where it waits. Where it watches." The friends fanned out, trying to explore without panicking. Emily found a room with an old fireplace and a cracked mirror. The glass was so grimy it barely reflected her face. Yet in the corner of her eye, she thought she saw movement, a flicker of a figure that disappeared when she looked straight at it. Tyler, trying to make light of it, joked that it was just their imagination. But even he was pale and jittery-eyed as they moved deeper. The air grew colder. Their breaths came out in foggy puffs, and the flashlight beams wavered as if resisting the shadows. They began hearing faint noises, almost imperceptible, a floorboard creaking behind them, soft scuffing as though someone or something was following. Every time they turned, there was nothing, but the sense of being watched grew heavier. It was a presence, not a person, pressing against their senses dot in the back of the cabin. Jason found a staircase leading downward into what appeared to be a basement. The opening was a gaping black hole, the steps covered in dust, cobwebs, and old, dried stains. It smelled of iron, damp earth, and decay so pungent it made their stomachs twist. He called the others over, but none wanted to go first. Megan, against her better judgment, led the way, flashlight shaking in her hand. Every step down felt like descending further into the belly of the forest itself. The basement was larger than expected, with walls lined by jagged wooden supports. Faded shapes were painted on the walls, symbolic, cryptic, almost ritualistic. There were scorch marks in some places and old, broken furniture scattered as though some violent event had occurred long ago. The floor was slick in spots with something dark. The smell of old blood was overpowering, making it hard to breathe. They tried to rationalize everything, telling themselves it was an old hunter's cabin abandoned decades ago. But the cabin had a life of its own, a malevolent intelligence that seemed to shift the shadows when they weren't looking. The whispers became clearer, forming syllables that were almost intelligible, their names repeated over and over. Each voice was slightly different, distorted, echoing in the walls. Panic started bubbling beneath the surface. Then something moved in the corner. A flash of dark fabric, a shadow detaching itself from the walls. Jason shouted and everyone turned, but nothing was there. It was then that the tension reached a breaking point. Every sense was on edge. Every creak, every whisper, every shift of light seemed amplified. The forest outside the cabin felt like the cold, suffocating darkness of the cabin seemed to tighten around them like a living thing. One by one, the friends began to vanish, or worse. Tyler was the first. A sudden crash came from the far corner of the main floor. Megan, Sarah, and the others ran toward the noise, only to find him sprawled on the floor, his skull split open, blood pooling like a dark lake around his body. His eyes were wide in shock, staring at something unseen. The others froze, panic making their lungs seize. Emily screamed as something sharp grazed her shoulder, slicing the fabric of her jacket and drawing a thin line of blood. The cut was clean but deep, and the metallic scent made everyone gag. Then Sarah disappeared. 1 second she was holding Megan's hand, the next she was gone, leaving behind only a streak of blood leading into the shadows. Each heartbeat felt like a drum in the chest, echoing the sound of their own terror. Jason, trying to keep calm, grabbed Megan and Emily, urging them to retreat toward the basement, hoping it might provide shelter or an escape. But the stairs seemed to stretch downward endlessly, shadows pooling like ink beneath their feet. Something brushed past Ryan's leg, and when he looked down, a hand pale, skeletal, and dripping with dark, congealed blood snatched at him before vanishing into the shadows. He stumbled backward, screaming, and in that moment, the remaining friends realized the cabin wasn't just haunted. It was alive, hunting, feeding on their fear. The basement was worse than they imagined. The walls were now smeared with fresh blood, streaks like twisted artwork carved by some monstrous force. Torn clothing hung from nails driven into the wooden beams. Bits of flesh, small, almost imperceptible at first, were stuck in the cracks of the floor. The air reeked of iron and decay. Each inhale burned their lungs. Megan fell to her knees, retching. Then they heard it. The whispers had turned into laughter, soft, wet, human and inhuman at the same time. It came from everywhere, wrapping around them, echoing off the walls. And then came the movement shadows, slithering along the walls, sometimes separating from the surfaces, forming distorted, grotesque figures that hovered just out of reach. Megan shone her flashlight on one, and the beam illuminated a figure with hollow eyes. Its mouth stretched wide in a permanent scream, fingers elongated and bent backward like claws. It hissed and lunged out. Emily screamed as the figure passed through her, ripping a shallow cut along her torso that bled immediately. She fell to the floor, shivering violently, while Megan tried to help her up. Another shadow emerged behind Megan, grabbing her hair and yanking her backward. She hit the floor hard, the impact cutting her forehead and spraying blood across the wooden boards. The metallic smell was overwhelming, filling their nostrils, mixing with fear and sweat. Ryan, desperate, tried to grab a fallen plank from the floor as a weapon, but every object he swung passed through the shadows like they were intangible, and each time a friend would scream in the distance, their pain echoing down the halls. One by one, they were being separated, and every corner of the basement seemed to twist and change, creating new passages that didn't exist moments ago. Finally, Jason, bloodied and exhausted, stumbled into a small, sealed chamber in the far corner of the basement. The walls were covered in grotesque drawings, faces twisted in agony, bodies dismembered, eyes hollow. In the middle of the room lay a note, soaked in crimson, the edges curling with age. No one leaves. Not alive. Not ever. The message was simple but horrifying, written in what seemed to be human blood. Megan, crawling to Jason, saw movement in the cracked mirror at the end of the room. She froze. The reflection wasn't hers. Her face had changed, twisted and monstrous, veins blackening, teeth sharper, eyes dark and hollow. She screamed, but no sound came from her throat. Only a high-pitched shriek echoed from the shadows. Jason tried to pull her away, but something invisible wrapped around her limbs, dragging her toward the mirror. Megan's screams merged with the whispers, becoming one unbearable chorus of pain and fear. The shadows seemed to feed on their terror, growing more solid, more violent. Hands, clawed and dripping with blood, reached from the walls and floorboards, tearing at clothing, skin, and muscle. Megan and Emily's screams filled the basement, mingling with Ryan's desperate cries and Jason's frantic shouts. Blood sprayed across walls and floor as each friend was grabbed, dragged, or attacked. The cabin was no longer just a building. It was a predator, and they were the prey. Jason, realizing he was alone, or nearly raced toward the exit he thought led outside. But the front door now opened to nothing but a void of blackness, stretching endlessly, swallowing the weak flashlight beams. The whispers became voices, chanting, mocking him. Every step brought a new horror. Limbs dangling from the ceiling, faces pressed into the walls, eyes opening in the shadows to stare directly at him. Finally, Jason stumbled into the central room, where a full-length mirror stood untouched by the destruction. Exhausted, terrified, and covered in blood his own and others, he dared to look into it. His reflection shifted violently, morphing into a grotesque version of himself. His mouth stretched into a grin filled with jagged teeth, eyes black as night, skin marred with scratches and scars that weren't his. The room seemed to close in, the shadows converging, whispering promises of pain and inevitability. Last thing Jason saw before the darkness consumed him completely was the blood-smeared walls beginning to pulse, as if breathing. The cabin exhaled around him, satisfied, leaving only silence in its wake. Outside, the forest remained quiet, empty, but the echoes of their screams lingered, trapped within the walls forever. The whispers continued for anyone who might dare enter again, promising that no one leaves. Alive. By the end, every friend had vanished or been transformed into something unrecognizable. The cabin stood quietly in the forest, its windows dark, its doors slightly ajar, waiting for the next group of thrill-seekers. The forest around it swallowed the night completely, leaving nothing but shadows and the faintest metallic scent of blood hanging in the air.
Please like and subscribe channel Fear Frequency for more horror stories. Thank you.